Let's turn to the fall election. What do you think is the
Yeah.
biggest issue for voters this election?
Right now, for the first time, I feel really, in a long time, a little bit energized about where we're going. I think the tax reform, which is being maligned a lot by Nancy Pelosi and my opponent, claiming that somehow tax reform and low and middle income taxpayers getting a break once and for all directly from the federal government is somehow a bad thing. I think they're trying to diffuse and confuse everybody about the issue because they know it's working. They know it's a step in the right direction. And oddly enough, in spite of the governor's attempts and my opponent and Nancy Pelosi trying to, sabotage the tax reform, it looks like an independent agency, the Tax Foundation, looks like New York could actually be one of the biggest gainers in producing jobs and producing some vitality in our economy. And that would be a great thing looking at the way New York has been doing business. We spend about $8 billion, which I think is double or triple of what any other state spends in so-called economic development money. I call it cronyist dollars, crony capitalism or cronyism or whatever you want to call it, and all that money that the governor hands out to his friends or people that has now resulted in, I guess we're going to end up with altogether 7 or 8 public corruption trials based, all this money that comes in. But even with all that money we spend more than other states, New York is dead last in job creation. So I think the answer and the secret to what we should be doing is focusing on our small businesses, individuals, entrepreneurs. They create 70% of our new jobs. Something like 98% of the businesses in our own community are small businesses, whether it's a pizza store, an auto shop, a law firm, an accounting firm. They are who the bulk of our economy is. Let's help the people that are here, that are already committed to our communities. We've given them a tax break on the federal side. We've rolled back some regulations. So getting the economy moving, getting people back to work, getting a job, and having that happen in an organic way like we're trying to do it on the federal side. If we could just get some help from our state partners, I think we could see a rebirth in our region.
Mm-hmm. Some have complained about the lack of civility in our recent political debates. Do you agree with that?
I think the media loves to hype up a lot of the angst, but between my colleagues that I work with in the Congress and many of my colleagues I worked with in the state assembly, I don't think there's that much animosity. And I think an unusual thing that my freshman class did, which was kind of by accident, we, before we even got sworn in, we got to go to our orientation in Williamsburg, and we all went down on a train, and we got to Williamsburg. We checked into the hotel that we're all staying at, and there was 8 inches of snow fell, and we were stranded there, and the entire town shut down because they can't handle snow like we can. And so there were about 52 of us, about equally divided between Democrats and Republicans, potential, freshman members who are going to get sworn in. And we sat down and we said, how can we be different as a class? And we decided to do a commitment to civility, and we laid out, what we wanted to do, endeavor to try to include our colleagues in a bipartisan way for bills, for resolutions, letters to the president, any initiatives that we institute, getting together on a regular basis, in a social way. I've lived up to it. Every bill that I put out is bipartisan. It takes a little longer. I work with my Democratic colleagues. I change the language enough so that it's palatable for them and it still meets the needs of what the legislation seeks to do. The only time we don't have a bipartisan piece is if it's something really district specific where you wouldn't normally have, a colleague though. But what it's done is really let me see a lot of the people on the other side who are good people. We might not agree. We all wanted to sit together like during the first joint address, but unfortunately the old timers, take the seats, and so we couldn't do that. But we've had a number of parties. I work with my colleague Lisa Blunt-Rochester. We're kind of the social committee. She's the first Black woman elected in the state of Delaware, and we kind of do we had a October frosh for our freshman class, and we organize we'll go to the baseball game and we'll all sit together, the congressional baseball game. I'm also on the congressional softball team. And that's fun because it's not only bipartisan, it's bicameral, so we get to meet Senate colleagues. And so I think, the collegiality is certainly maybe not at the top, is definitely there. And there's definitely a will for people to want to work together. And I think that's really good. I think what happens when we go to our districts or, special interests get involved or the leadership gets involved, I think that's where, the media really likes to capitalize and really just stoke the fire on a lot of these things. And unfortunately, from my side, I've never seen the lack of civility really coming from the other side as much as I have now. I mean, I've just never seen anything like it. I mean, I get death threats. I've had people come to me and, yell at me in a restaurant just last night. I was just having a drink in Binghamton with a bunch of friends, and some guy just came in and attacked me and called me evil and everything else. And, to be perfectly honest with you, if I ran into someone in another politician in a bar or restaurant and, I didn't agree with them on anything and maybe didn't even like them, I would never be so rude as to, say something like that. And so I do wonder where we've gone and so from the civility point, I don't think it's so much our colleagues, although there are a few who could be more civil, but I think our class has really endeavored to work together. And you'd be surprised how much you have in common. I mean, I would watch Debbie Wasserman Schultz, for example, or the congresswoman from Florida on TV, and I'm like, I don't agree with anything she says. But, I play on the congressional softball team with her, and we've gotten to be good friends. And her daughter is a lovely person, and she comes to our practices, and we've been out and sat at dinner together at events, and she was really instrumental in helping me get an amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act bill last week. She was on the subcommittee that handles, for example, we got this perimeter fencing for the Air Force Research Lab, otherwise known as her own lab, and she was on the subcommittee, and she was able to get me unanimous votes on the Democratic side for that. So, you never know who's going to be friendly with. I mean, of all the people I've seen her on TV, I've never thought I'd be friendly with her, but I really like her one-on-one. I mean, she's a friend of mine personally, and that's because of our work on, it's just because of the softball team, and understanding that these people are, Debbie's a mom, she's got parents and a family, and as much as we like to dehumanize or alienate ourselves from these people, I think coming together in a lot of these ways are really helpful. And I think our freshman class has been a leader in that, and it's been I'm just really excited to be part of it. Mm-hmm. It's fun. Sorry I'm talking too long.
No, you're fine.
All right.
Some argue...
I've got this too, yeah.
That's fine. Yeah. Some argue that Washington is broken in the sense that the parties sometimes are no longer able to work together to solve problems on certain issues. Do you agree with that?
I think on some issues, and I would really like to see, and I think that new leadership on the Democratic side would really be helpful. I think that it's a mistake that the Democrats didn't join in with us on tax reform, and they didn't really want to work with us on fixing the problem with the Affordable Care Act, which is just imploding and destroying our communities, our small businesses. Individuals can't afford to even have health care. Hardworking people are paying enormous amounts in premiums, and the deductibles are so high that they're prohibited from even seeing a doctor. And I know that's not the goal of anyone. And so I want to find a way that we can fix this for the people that we serve. And so I think there is a little bit of maybe it's a power game. We don't want to lose power, so we're just not going to agree with you on anything. I think there's a lot of hostility towards the president. A lot of people don't like his style. He's unorthodox. He came to drain the swamp. And he has his own style, but I think that there has been a lot of bullying, and I'll call it that and the president got above that. And I think Republicans' instincts are to be, talk about policy and to talk about things in a different way. And the Democrats have always been appealing in a more emotional way. And I think he was able to kind of rise above the media, which I think one of his greatest achievements is calling out what I think is one of the greatest problems with our society, and that's the news media. And the news media has abdicated its role as the fourth estate. They're not doing what they should be doing. They need to be a watchdog. They need to be as independent as they can be. It's fine to have your opinion on the editorial page, but when it comes to reporting news, it's what's not reported or the way it's reported that does not reflect the truth. I ran our family newspaper, and we put whatever needed to go in. I had $1 million libel and libel policy in place because I wanted to make sure that we were always fair. And when there was a letter to the editor, as long as it wasn't vulgar or something we couldn't print, we verified who did it. And I just think that the media is just so hyper partisan, and I know I think it's to some extent it's on both sides, but I really do think the mainstream media really is very left leaning. I will be perfectly honest with you. I am just appalled at the way that the Observer-Dispatch covers this region. You can look at it on the hospital issue. It almost seems like they're in the tank with the status quo, instead of doing investigative journalism and really helping the people in our community. And I think they've been instrumental in causing a lot of the decline in our community by not telling the truth to a lot of our residents here. And they seem to be in the bed with the politicians that are in power instead of really kind of calling them out. And, I feel like, I could complain and say I don't get a fair shake, but I really don't think that they want to tell the story. I have a lot of great stories that I could tell about, nobody knows anything about me in my community. And I've had more stories written about me outside of my hometown than even in my hometown. And I think that there's just, it's unfortunate, but we're going to continue to fight. I'm going to continue to tell the truth. And by the way, in spite of them, I've been able to win. So I think people get it. Like, people want to hear the truth. And I think that's one of the reasons that, the president, with all his sort of idiosyncrasies, and he does make me cringe, and I've said it all the time. But I think in the end, you can't really argue with what he's trying to do. I mean, he said, I'm going to do certain tasks on the campaign, and he made these promises, and he's like checking them off one at a time. Who would think that he would follow through on so many things, that he's actually a task completer? And if you don't like his personality, great, but you know what? I want a task completer, and that's who I voted for, is someone that will do that.
What do you believe is the difference between Albany and Washington, in your opinion?
Well, after 6 years in Albany, it's an embarrassment to this nation. It's an embarrassment to our state. I call Albany the sewer, and at least in the swamp, they're like living beings can survive in the swamp. As bad as the Washington environment is and the swamp is, there's actual competition. There's actual laws in place and the protection of both sides. In Albany, it's one-party rule. It's corruption built in. Just a proof of this is I represented 134,000 people in my assembly district, which was shameful if you just look at my assembly district. It was the longest one ever created in the history of New York. It was contrary to the state's constitution. It was done intentionally to get rid of me, to remove me from office, because I stood up to the most powerful people. Sheldon Silver, I called him out when it was discovered that he used taxpayer money to pay off, and cover up sexual harassment claims against women. This is even before the Me Too movement. And there were many attempts. That was the year they tried to silence me. I called out Governor Cuomo and even Dean Skelos and whoever was, whatever party it was in. And so I think there was a concerted effort. I stood up to Ray Albert, or I stood up to the people in our own party that I didn't think were doing what they should be doing for the people. And so, Albany is just, it's just too bad that the way it operates. But, there hasn't been a substantive bill co-sponsored by the Republicans since 1974. And what does that say about, we've actually said, can we just have one bill pass the state assembly? Can we just get some reforms in the state assembly where we could actually bring bills to the floor? And you know what? The Democrats vote them all down, including my opponent. He votes down every reform that we've proposed. That's reasonable. That was recommended by the Brennan Center for Justice back in 2004 when they deemed New York the most dysfunctional legislature in the nation. And even some of those reforms we can't get done. So Albany needs a lot of repair. Some people say maybe it should just implode and we rebuild. But it's an embarrassment to our state, and we have great people that work there. By the way, I don't want to say everybody's bad, but the way it operates. I mean, I go to a place and 30 people, I think, in the last 20 years, have been indicted or convicted on corruption charges in our own state capitol. What does that say about our state? And so that being said, I just want to make sure there are good people on both sides that work there who are my good friends and colleagues who are really trying, but it's so hard to break through in Albany. So when you go to Washington, there's an opportunity, the quality of the people. Everybody hates Congress, but when you go to Congress, I mean, boy, am I impressed with some of the people I work with. They're phenomenal, they're amazing, they're 3-star generals, they're people that were Navy SEALs, people that have done amazing things in industry and business. There's some people that aren't so impressive, but there are a lot of good people, and I think we just need to continue to focus on getting those good people to get the things they need done. So I want to just address one thing, and I know I'm talking really fast, but one of the things that I think is really important is that people are so adverse to the idea that maybe I'm a Republican and a Democrat, and it looks like we're arguing, but this country was founded on ideas and robust debate, and there's nothing wrong with advancing your cause, debating and on both sides, and being tough and being persuasive. And in the end, maybe you have to compromise. That's okay. But there's nothing wrong with advancing your cause. I think people get a little too worried about, we love to be bipartisan, and in the end, that's good, and we should be bipartisan where we find common ground, but we should never abandon our values, and we should always make sure that even in attempts to be bipartisan, that we remember that we are representing our region, and we have to advocate strongly for them and zealously. And so that's something I try to do, and I think there's nothing wrong with debating and standing for your cause. And I think sometimes people want to say, well, you should just be, caving in or surrendering all the time. And I don't think you really need to surrender until you really know that you're at least advancing. Maybe you're going to go 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but at least you're fighting to get those 2 steps forward. And so I think that people need to understand that's the way the system was set up. It wasn't set up so that we all are just getting along. I mean, we don't want just getting along. Certainly we don't want to take it personally, but you have to understand we're advancing principles about freedom and individual rights in one of the most important constitutional republics, the only one so far that's been successful that's lasted this long, and we need to preserve it. And so I think, arguing, debating our cause, there's nothing wrong with that, and I think people need to be a little more resilient.
I do have one more question. It's
long answers. Sorry.
That's fine. It's 2 parts. Who are your role models for getting into politics, and who do you think could be a role model for people today in politics?
It's funny. People always are surprised by this, but 2 people who I always look at as role models because they fought, for the greater good, and one of them was Gandhi, and he fought against it like seemingly impossible odds. And he did it, he came up with a sort of a groundbreaking idea to stand up to people by using peace and not through violence. And that was one of the things I really was interested in him. And it was interesting that Martin Luther King, who I also have a lot of respect for, actually studied with Gandhi. I wrote a paper about it in college. I wish I could find it because I got a good grade on it. But it was all about how Martin Luther King learned to be peaceful and advocating for the cause and about what he stood for. But one other person who I really look up to, who just means a lot to me, is, she's now a saint, but Sister Teresa, Saint Teresa, because she is someone that was helped people and looked at all of us as children of God, and that nobody was better than anyone else. And she was someone who never took she never gained material belongings or anything. She stood so true to her cause and her belief and did so much for this world. And I think she just I just think of her as a great role model. And I think I see sometimes people who are, very religious or stand, definitely, people who believe in God, but they're living a really high lifestyle. And I think for her to do what she did, to go to leper colonies and to work with people who were dying or starving in Africa and all around the world, and just spreading her message of peace, I think she's someone who I looked up to. So in politics, I still am a Ronald Reagan fan. I still, if it's going to be someone like that, he broke through. Everyone thought he couldn't win. And I love that he grew up as a poor person, didn't have a lot, and he was someone who just, stood for something against the grain at that time. Everyone thought he was crazy. But, in the last analysis, as a local person, I have to say my father, because he was someone who also grew up very poor, and he always was looking for integrity and loyalty and honesty and trying to help people who were really in need. And so he always used to say to me, and he said, look, stop complaining about where you are in life. Never be a victim and never hold a grudge, and forgive people who might not be kind to you. And he was always happy, always, no matter what happened. I mean, he spent the last 7 years of his life in a wheelchair and going blind, and he was a very active person, and he went a long way for a guy that came from, a poor family and a big family. And so to me, I have lasting memories of him just, always standing up for the person that was downtrodden or the underdog or doing the right thing, even when he never, was never in it for profit or money. And, he died a person that was, lived up to his values right to the end.